Welcome to Pen to Pod. This week we are doing a solo episode with me where I will be diving into an aspect of writing craft. In this episode, I talk about how to overcome writer's block. As we all head into November with whatever challenge we are doing to try to get out as many words as we can on our drafts, I thought it would be a good idea to revisit how to overcome those blocks when we are feeling just creatively stuck. Hope you enjoy this episode. So this week we're talking about getting unstuck when writing, and oh man, do I always get stuck. I do feel like when people go searching for this answer, how do I get out of a writing slump, a writing block, or anything like that, I don't really know if there's a perfect answer. And I say that for almost everything in writing, right? I don't think there is a perfect one-size-fits-all for any creative process. So today I'm just going to talk through a couple things that I've done to get unstuck when writing. And it's important to just take whatever resonates with you and then leave behind anything that you think might not work. Like I said, at the end of the day, we are artists. And I don't know if we remember that much. Writing is an art, and the process is the art that we are creating. So when you have writer's block, you're feeling stuck with your work, it's important for you to figure out what works for you to move forward. I've actually broken down getting stuck into 3 different categories. The first category is a mechanical block, is kind of what I'm calling it, which to me is when I'm stuck because something isn't working within like the writing conventions and writing craft. So something doesn't feel right in, setting or my outline or tone or, something writing craft specific doesn't feel right, and I'm getting stuck because of that. Then you have more of an actual creative block, which I feel like is, I guess, more so along traditional writer's block, where I know I have to write, I know I want to write, but I just can't write for some reason. So that's going to fall into my creativity block. And then I have an unmotivated block, which is I know I have to write, but I don't really want to write. And that becomes a whole other issue in itself. So those are the 3 blocks I'm looking at today, and I'm going to give 3 examples for each block. So for the first one, this mechanical block, the number one thing I can recommend to do is to read books in your genre. I feel like this is my go-to advice for everything, but if you want to be a better writer, you have to be reading. And if I'm feeling stuck mechanically in my book, one of the best places I can go are to the ones who've come before me and really read within my genre. Each genre has specific genre expectations that most publishers and readers are looking for, whether consciously or subconsciously. These genre expectations range from scenes your novel may have to the tone of the novel, like what we talked about in my previous solo episode. I'm not going to dive too much into genre expectations right now because I actually will have an entire episode on that soon. But reading in your genre can be very helpful to get your mind back into the place it needs to be to feel fully immersed in the genre you're writing. So for me, I'm writing Project House of Stone, and it is an urban fantasy, so a contemporary novel with fantasy elements. I've already picked out a couple of genre books for me to read for the end of this year, especially when I'm feeling stuck. Some examples of those are Jade City by Fonda Lee and When Among Crows by Veronica Roth. So how do you pick these books? And just, I have quite a list of these books, but I just picked 2 for the sake of time. But how should you pick these books? Should I just go to the genre page on Barnes& Noble or Goodreads and pick some, you can, but I would recommend trying to pick books that have similar elements to the book you are writing. So for example, Jade City focuses on a mafia family with fantastical elements, and my book has a mafia adjacent family also with fantastical elements. So I know that when I'm feeling stuck with those family dynamics and that seedy underbelly of magical criminal activity, I will be turning to Jade City. One Among Crows deals with a boy who was raised in a community of kind of like demon hunters, but it's really a pretty terrible cult. And in my book, we also have a cult. I know when I'm feeling stuck with the cult dynamics or the description of the group or the manipulation tactics that they use, I will be turning to One Among Crows. Then there really are just other books I picked out in the urban fantasy genre that don't necessarily have specific elements that are related to my book, but they're still in the same genre. And they were on my want to read list in Goodreads. So I'll be picking those up when I just want to read for fun. That way I still stay fully immersed in this genre while writing. Now, this advice won't work for everyone. Sometimes people need to read things that aren't in their genre when drafting, and that's okay. Again, figure out what works for you. Maybe you need to read something that's totally not in your genre, or maybe you just need to turn to short stories. If you don't already know, I'm a huge fan of short stories to study craft. So if you are stuck on a writing craft aspect, that mechanical block, reading short stories might be the best path for you. And if you want to see how you can analyze short stories, you can actually go back to the last two, I think, solo episodes that I did, where we looked at writing voice and writing tone using short stories. One of my favorite things to do when I feel stuck mechanically is to actually work ahead. I'm someone who likes to work ahead in the draft, particularly when I'm feeling like I'm just trudging through a chapter. If I can't get through the chapter, I instead skip ahead to another chapter or scene I'm really excited about, and I work on that for a little bit, then go back. When I write in order, I still always give myself the option to rewrite that chapter if I want. If you are a pantser or a discovery writer, this may mean that you don't always know what's coming ahead, but this is a great time to see what could come ahead. Maybe you're trudging through a chapter because you don't know how it will end or what's on the other side. A great way to get through this is to mind map different possibilities or outcomes from the chapter that you're currently writing and write out these different outcomes. Maybe just write a couple sentences, a little snippet, or a scene to get you inspired again and on the right track. You can still mind map that way if you are a plotter as well. So if you are trudging through a lot of chapters in your book, maybe the outline isn't really working. Try to brainstorm other possibilities and write those snippets. Go with what excites you the most. A lot of the times when I'm trudging through a chapter, it's because the chapter probably isn't working. Just like how I said, the outline might not be working if you're trudging through a lot of the chapters. If this chapter is standing in the way of me heading toward that finish line, I will skip what feels like roadblocks. So I will either skip the chapter entirely or I skip parts or scenes of a chapter. When I skip, though, I take notes on why I am skipping, almost like a reflection. So yes, you can always write like in brackets the add X here later, but make sure to leave future you notes on why you're doing this. I like to answer some questions like, why are you skipping this part? What is getting you hung up? What do you feel like you could do differently? And how do you feel like this could or should happen? And honestly, sometimes as I'm just reflecting on what I'm skipping, I actually end up unlock what's missing and I can write it. Other times, I simply just still skip it and I leave the reflection notes for future Mikayla to work out later. So those are my top 3 things that I do when I'm feeling mechanically stuck. So I will either read books in the genre that I'm writing, I will try to work ahead on future scenes or chapters, or I will completely skip on what is getting me stuck while leaving notes for future me. So if I'm in a creative block, which means, I know I should write and I actually want to write, but for some reason when I sit down, it's just not coming to me, That I would declare as more of like a creative block. There's a couple things that I do. One is to do another creative activity, which I think this is pretty typical advice. Do a creative act that isn't writing. So when you're doing that, though, you're really trying to charge up that creative battery while not burning out on your writing. And I think it's just so important to have a creative hobby that you don't want to monetize, that's just for you, and also can allow you to sort of get into that zone, get into that ultimate state of flow that we also look to get into when we are writing. I have quite a few creative hobbies, but some that I like to do that allows me to get into that flow state are hobbies like crocheting, embroidery, and sewing. I love these creative activities because they allow me to do something that writing doesn't really allow me to do, which is using more of those fine motor skills and creating something physically with my hands. I really love crocheting the most, and I'm going to hopefully learn how to knit soon. But with crocheting, I can create something and zone out, which is kind of the perfect combination for me. With embroidery and sewing, I'm usually following a complicated pattern, and it requires a little bit more brain power, but that still is great because it makes me focus and doesn't really allow for any other distractions. Like, I can't really watch a TV show or a movie or listen to an audiobook when I'm doing embroidery and sewing because I'm so focused on the task at hand. When I'm crocheting, however, I usually can listen to something else while crocheting. Some other activities that allow for that flow state, where you may be able to do other things or not, are things like solving a puzzle, drawing, painting, coloring, you name it. All of these activities really allow me to just get out of my head, get in the zone and just create something. What's nice is I can usually work on a hobby until a portion of it or all of it is complete. And then I also kind of get that nice serotonin boost for making progress on something. Once I feel recharged enough, it's back to writing. If you are able to as well, I think it's really beneficial to get into like a class for a creative hobby. Some classes I've taken in the past have been like a pottery class, maybe learning how to play guitar. If you're able to afford to take a class that like meets at a set time every week and you're getting out of your house, you're doing something creative that's not writing, this can also help you recharge that creative well on a weekly basis. Another idea that I do that's a bit more unconventional is to try to write in public, which what I mean by that is really to people watch and immerse yourself in another environment. So this may seem strange, but stick with me. When I'm feeling stuck creatively, so I know that I have to write and I want to write, but I just can't sometimes, a change in my environment can really help. So I'll pack up all my things, head to a local coffee shop, a park, or whatever space I can. When there, though, I don't jump into my project right away. Instead, I'll pull out my journal and write by hand any observations that I have. It's kind of like fully immersing myself into that location. I will write about the person across from me and what I imagine they're doing or thinking. And yes, I will eavesdrop on conversations if I can. So I'll even like write down dialogue snippets. And I will just simply sit there and be a sponge for the world. Another way to do this is I will go for a long walk through a neighborhood or a park. And when I come across a place or thing that sparks my interest, I sit down and write about it. For example, If I see a cool shop on a neighborhood walk, I may go in, look around, and then imagine a scene with my characters in this shop or a shop like it. Then when I walk out, I will actually dictate that scene into my headphones. So, like talking into my headphones, either on the audio, just like recording app, or I'll even just, record my audio in notes. And it just kind of looks like I'm talking on the phone, which is nice. It just allows me to write or think creatively in just a completely different way. So if I'm having a walk in nature and I see a really cool old tree or some funky rock formation, I'll sit down and write about it or dictate it. It's really just taking the things that I see every day or things that I'm exploring, and I'm trying to either write about them in my world or put them into the world that I'm writing. Lastly, when I'm having a creative block, I will not only take myself into a new environment, but I will take my characters into a new environment. I've talked about this in a couple videos on my YouTube channel for writing great characters and how I like to write my characters in different situations to better understand them, which is true. But it's also a great way for me to just get into the headspace of writing. I'll write my characters in alternate universe situations. So maybe my main characters are now a pirate crew on a ship. What's happening? Maybe they're all neighbors in the same apartment complex, or they're in college, or my personal favorite, they all go to Disney World. Whatever it is, writing my characters outside their environment always helps me to unlock more about them and get excited again to write them back in their element. So when I'm feeling creatively stuck, those are the three things that I like to do. I like to switch to another creative activity, change my environment, and really immerse myself in these kind of unique and interesting writing prompts, and then also throw my characters into a completely different element before putting them back on their own. And last, we have, I think, probably the worst type of block, which is that unmotivated block. So you know you should be writing, but you really don't want to. I get stuck in this place quite a bit. And if I'm honest with you guys, most of the time when I have this unmotivated block, it's because I'm scared. I try to talk pretty candidly about this on my YouTube channel, but I do feel like every time I update you guys on my writing project, I'm always like, hey, I'm really freaking terrified, but I am. And it's this war between wanting to write this book of my heart so well and the fear of being an absolute disaster. And I know that the first draft is supposed to be bad. I tell you guys all the time. I tell myself all the time. But if I am feeling unmotivated, I really need to just remind myself and sit with myself in that. Sometimes I will physically write out, I can write bad. Like I can write bad things. It's okay. They will become better words. Sometimes I have to put a million sticky notes all over my computer that are like motivating me. Like, you can do this. It's okay if it sucks. Just keep moving forward. It's important to remember that this is a process, that the book of your heart, the book of your dreams, may be amazing and beautiful all up in your head, but when you try to put it on paper, it might be clunky and not perfect and isn't sounding like all the amazing thoughts you had. But that's okay. It's going to come out a little awkward, but you will be able to make it better. And the reason why you will is because, like I said in the beginning, to be a better writer, you have to be a reader. And when we read books, we know what we like. We know what sounds good, what is great writing to us. And we just have to have that attitude and that lens when we approach revising the first draft. I know revising seems like such a daunting task, but you know your stuff. Even if this is the first book you've ever written, you know how to write a book. because you've read so many books. Okay, so let it come out horribly and you will be able to fix it. I have faith in you. So that's the first step. Let's just get that step done before we do anything else. We just have to remind ourselves we can write poorly, it's allowed to be clunky, and we can fix it. We absolutely can. Another thing I'd recommend is find a creative buddy. If you can find a writing community, even better. But if you can just find one person who's also a writer, who gets it, who understands the struggles of writing block, and understands how hard but also beautiful it is to do this thing, it can be so helpful. Just being able to have someone that you can talk to about these blocks, and even take it a step further, someone that you can talk to specifically about your story, can be so helpful. I am personally an auditory processor, which is probably why I have a podcast and a YouTube channel, but I need to talk through things. So if I'm not talking to myself, I'm talking to someone else about my book, my story, and the blocks that I have. I don't have the best advice on finding a writing community, to be honest, because I've had a hard time myself. So if you're having a hard time, just know you're not alone. I'm also having a hard time. Navigating social media spaces is very awkward for me and strange to try to build up that community, but the best advice I can give is to just try. Put yourself out there, hop into someone's DMs, comment on their things, let them know you were excited about their project, you want to talk about writing, and it will happen. And if you ever need someone to talk about writing with, you can always hop in my DMs. I'm always down to chat writing. And lastly, something that I really like to do, it's kind of like a self-care session for your writing practice, is romanticize your writing session. I'm sure you've seen things like this on YouTube, on TikTok, on Reels, but it really can work. Like if you can set the mood for your writing session, it really helps me. Maybe you need to light a candle, dim the lights, get a fancy fun drink, put on an amazing playlist, lock the doors, whatever you need to do, whether it's in your own environment, at a coffee shop, go get yourself a little treat, a little drink, and make sure that the vibes are top notch. Romanticize the writing session. It can make a world of difference. So that's what I like to do when I'm feeling totally unmotivated. One is to remind myself that I'm allowed to write poorly, and I probably will, and that's okay because it will get better. I try to get really clear about my goals and remember the why behind the writing, talk to my friends who are also writers, and then ultimately romanticize my writing session. So I gave a lot of tips on how to overcome writer's block in this episode today. I hope that at least just one thing that I talked about helps you or gives you an idea for something else that you can do or add into your routine when you feel mechanically, creatively, or unmotivatedly, it's not really a word, but blocked. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I hope you guys get some writing done. And if you don't, because you're blocked and that's why you're listening to this, then go try one of these tactics out and let me know if it worked. You can always comment and communicate with me on my YouTube channel at Mick Writes, or like I said, don't be afraid to hop in my DMs on Instagram at Mick is Writing. If you haven't already checked out the other episodes of Pen to Pod, I highly recommend you do so. And not because I'm biased, because this is my podcast, but because we have amazing episodes with amazing authors. So far, we've talked to Kath Richards, who writes romance, Tian Vitus, who writes speculative fiction and right now high fantasy, and then Rachel Kitch, who writes horror. 3 vastly different genres with 3 writers who have amazing, interesting journeys and awesome advice for you. So if you haven't listened to their episodes, please go give it a listen because you're probably going to learn a lot more from them than you will me. Also, if you haven't already, please go ahead and follow this podcast wherever you're listening. So subscribe to me on YouTube, follow on Apple or Spotify. If you are on Apple or Spotify, be sure to give us a rating because that helps us find more listeners like yourself. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. Hope you get some writing done. And if you don't, hope you give yourself some grace. Bye, writers.